Her shoes were lined up neatly. She always left them scattered. Maya stopped in the doorway and stared. The apartment was dark except for the amber glow leaking in through the kitchen window from the parking lot lamps outside. The light stretched across the floor in thin bars, catching the edges of her sneakers. They sat side by side against the wall, perfectly aligned. For a moment she simply stood there with one hand still on the doorknob, keys hanging from her fingers. Then she laughed quietly, a tired laugh, the kind people made when they noticed something strange and immediately decided it wasn't. She kicked off her boots every evening without thinking. Sometimes one landed near the couch. Sometimes both ended up in the hallway. More than once she'd found one under the coffee table. Neatness had never survived more than a day in her apartment. Yet there they were, lined up with impossible precision. She looked around. Nothing else seemed different. The small living room remained cluttered with books and unopened mail. A blanket hung halfway off the couch. A mug sat beside the television where she'd left it that morning. The silence felt ordinary. The refrigerator hummed. Pipes ticked somewhere in the walls. Outside, distant tires hissed over wet pavement. Maya shut the door and shrugged off her coat. By the time she reached the kitchen, she had already dismissed the unease. She probably did it herself. People forgot things, especially lately. Work had become exhausting. Long hours blurred together. Entire conversations disappeared from memory. Maybe she'd come home yesterday and absent-mindedly organized them. The explanation felt weak. But it was enough. She made tea and settled on the couch. The feeling lingered anyway. Not fear, just a tiny irritation. Like noticing a painting hanging a fraction of an inch crooked. Something didn't fit. Hours later she woke to darkness. The television had switched itself off after streaming static recommendations for hours. Her tea sat cold on the table. The apartment seemed unusually still. She checked her phone. 2:14 a.m. A wind had risen outside. Branches scraped against the building with a dry, repetitive sound. Maya rubbed her eyes and stood. As she crossed the living room she paused. The shoes, still there, waiting by the door. She wasn't sure why that bothered her. Simply did. The longer she looked, the more deliberate they appeared. Not arranged, placed, as if someone had wanted them noticed. The thought surfaced unexpectedly. Someone. Maya frowned. The apartment door remained locked. No windows were open. Nothing had been stolen. She shook her head and headed to bed. Yet as she lay beneath the blankets, sleep came slowly. The apartment felt different after midnight. Smaller somehow. The shadows gathered in corners where she couldn't quite track their shapes. The wind pressed softly against the windows. Every creak seemed louder than usual. Around 3 she thought she heard movement. A faint sound. Leather brushing wood. She opened her eyes. Silence. The darkness remained motionless. After several minutes she convinced herself it had been part of a dream. Eventually she slept. The next evening she returned home from work and froze before she'd even taken off her coat. The shoes were gone. Her stomach tightened. Not missing. Moved. They now sat beside the coat rack. Again perfectly aligned. Again impossibly neat. Maya stared at them. A strange pressure settled behind her ribs. She remembered clearly this time. Before leaving that morning she'd glanced at them near the door. Now they occupied an entirely different place. The apartment smelled faintly stale. Not unpleasant. Just closed up. As though the air hadn't moved all day. She checked every room. Closets. Bathroom. Under the bed. Nothing. No sign anyone had entered. No sign anyone ever had. The rational part of her mind assembled explanations. Stress. Distraction. Faulty memory. Sleepwalking. Each possibility arrived carrying less conviction than the last. That night she placed her phone on a shelf facing the entryway. She activated a motion recording app before bed. The act felt ridiculous. Still, it eased her mind. Until morning. The recording showed nothing unusual. Hours of darkness. Occasional headlights passing outside. shifting shadows from distant traffic. No movement, no interruptions. Yet the shoes had moved again. Now they rested directly beneath the hallway mirror. Maya replayed the footage 3 times. Nothing. The shoes appeared in one position. Then, several hours later, appeared in another. No transition. No movement. No missing footage. Her pulse quickened. The timestamps remained uninterrupted. The camera had captured every minute. And somehow it had captured nothing. The following days acquired a strange rhythm. Each evening brought another change. The shoes continued migrating through the apartment. Always paired. Always perfectly arranged. Sometimes near the bedroom door. Sometimes beneath a window. Sometimes beside the couch. Never randomly. Always somewhere visible. As though they were being displayed. Maya stopped inviting friends over. She stopped mentioning it. The words sounded absurd even in her own head. Instead she watched. Waited. Analyzed. The apartment began revealing details she'd never noticed before. The faint groan of floorboards settling after midnight. The way darkness gathered thicker near the hallway. The subtle temperature drop around 3 in the morning. Small things. Harmless things. Yet together they formed a pattern she couldn't define. One evening she found herself standing before the hallway mirror. The shoes sat directly below it. Her reflection stared back. Tired eyes. Messy hair. A face made older by lack of sleep. Then something occurred to her. She looked at the shoes. Then at the reflection. Then back. A sensation like cold water slid through her body. In the reflection, the shoes appeared slightly closer together. Not much. An inch, perhaps. She blinked. The difference vanished. Maya stepped backward so quickly her shoulder struck the wall. The impact echoed through the apartment. Silence followed. Heavy silence. The kind that seemed to listen. She laughed nervously. Her reflection remained ordinary. The shoes remained shoes. Yet she avoided the mirror for the rest of the night. Weeks passed. Sleep became fragmented. The apartment felt increasingly occupied despite remaining empty. Sometimes she sensed attention lingering just beyond her vision. Not watching exactly. Waiting. The feeling followed her from room to room. Patient presence. Never approaching. Never retreating. One rainy evening she returned home later than usual. The storm had swallowed the city. Water streaked the windows. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the clouds. Maya unlocked the door and stepped inside. Then stopped breathing. The shoes were in the center of the living room. Not against a wall. Not beside furniture. Centered. Facing the couch. Facing the exact spot where she spent most evenings. Waiting. The sight unsettled her more than anything before. Because it felt intentional. Communication without language. An arrangement meant to convey something. She stood motionless for a long time. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere above, a neighbor's plumbing rattled. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. Yet none of them diminished the certainty growing inside her. The apartment wanted her attention. Or something within it did. That night she couldn't sleep. Near dawn she sat on the couch watching the pale outline of the shoes. Gray morning light gradually seeped through the windows. The shadows thinned. The apartment softened. And for the first time in weeks, exhaustion overcame fear. Her eyes drifted closed. Only for a second. Maybe 2. When she opened them, the shoes were gone. Maya jerked upright. Her heart slammed painfully. The living room stood empty. Cold morning light filled the apartment. The shoes had vanished. She searched every room. Nothing. Panic built slowly, like rising water. Then she entered the bedroom. The shoes stood beside the bed, perfectly aligned, pointing toward the mattress, toward the hollow where she slept, toward the indentation her body left each night. Maya stared. A realization emerged from somewhere deep and unwelcome. The shoes had never been wandering. They had been moving closer. Not to her, to her place. Her routines, her shape within the apartment, as though something had been learning where she belonged. The room felt colder. The silence felt deeper. For several minutes she couldn't move. Then she noticed one final detail. The shoes weren't her size anymore. Only slightly different. Half a size larger, perhaps. Enough that she couldn't be completely certain. Enough that she stood frozen, staring. And as dawn brightened the room, Maya became aware of a second indentation beside her own on the mattress. A shallow impression in the sheets. Not fresh, not old, simply present. As though someone had been lying there for a very long time, waiting for her to notice. The bathroom faucet dripped in a perfect rhythm, like Morse code. Evan noticed it sometime after midnight. At first it was only another sound among many. The distant hum of traffic beyond the apartment complex, the refrigerator's occasional vibration through the kitchen floor, the wind brushing faintly against the building's exterior. His apartment was old enough that silence never truly existed. There was always some mechanical murmur threading through the darkness. But the dripping separated itself from everything else. Tick, 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 tick. A pause. Then it repeated. Evan lay awake on top of the blankets, staring at the pale rectangle of moonlight stretching across his bedroom ceiling. The pattern continued. Not random. Not the uneven leaking of a worn faucet. Rhythmic. Intentional. He checked his phone. 12:17 a.m. The screen's glow illuminated the room for a moment before darkness settled back into place. The drip came again, sharp and metallic against porcelain. His bathroom sat directly across the narrow hallway. The door was open. From bed, he could see only darkness beyond the frame. Tick, 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 tick. Evan exhaled. Old pipes, he thought. He rolled onto his side and closed his eyes. The dripping continued. 20 minutes later, he was still awake. The sound seemed louder now. Not physically louder. Closer. As though the apartment itself had contracted around it. The rhythm never varied. Never accelerated. Never faltered. Every drop struck with the same tiny note. A metronome hidden somewhere inside the walls. Finally, he got up. The floorboards felt cool beneath his bare feet. In the bathroom, moonlight spilled through the frosted window above the shower, painting silver bars across the tile. The faucet hung over the sink. A single bead of water trembled at its edge. It dropped. Tick. Another formed immediately. Evan turned the handle. The faucet squealed slightly. He tightened it harder. The drip stopped. Satisfied, he returned to bed. For several minutes there was silence. Then, tick, 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 tick. Evan stared into darkness. A knot tightened somewhere beneath his ribs. The sound was exactly the same. Not merely similar. Identical. As if someone had pressed play on a recording. He covered his head with a pillow. The rhythm penetrated the fabric. He eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, sunlight dissolved much of the unease. The apartment looked ordinary again. Cramped but familiar. Coffee grounds on the counter. Books stacked beside the sofa. Dust gathering along the windowsill. The faucet seemed harmless. When he checked it, no water dripped at all. He laughed quietly at himself. Lack of sleep. Too much work. Nothing more. Yet that night the dripping returned. The same rhythm. The same pauses. The same precision. Evan sat at the kitchen table listening. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Inside, the faucet maintained its measured sequence. He opened a browser and searched Morse code charts. The thought felt ridiculous. Still, he searched. The rhythm wasn't complex. Short, long, short. Several combinations repeated. He listened carefully. After 10 minutes, he scribbled dots and dashes onto a receipt. The resulting letters made little sense. Not words. Fragments. Mistakes. He closed the laptop. The dripping continued. Around 2 in the morning, he finally managed to sleep. The following night, it started earlier. 11 o'clock. Then 10:30 the night after that. Each evening, the pattern emerged a little sooner. Each evening, it occupied more of his attention. He began anticipating it. listening for it, dreading it. At work, he found himself tapping the rhythm unconsciously against his desk. During conversations, he would lose track of what people were saying and mentally replay the sequence. Tick, 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 tick. Pause. Repeat. His coworkers noticed his distraction. One asked if he was feeling all right. Evan said he wasn't sleeping well. That answer seemed sufficient. It wasn't entirely a lie. A week passed. The apartment felt different. Not changed exactly. Observed. The sensation emerged gradually. He would enter a room and experience a brief certainty that something had just stopped moving. Not a person. Not an animal. Simply movement itself. As though the apartment possessed hidden currents that withdrew whenever he approached. The dripping remained constant. Every night. Every hour. Never varying. One evening he recorded it on his phone. The audio file captured the pattern perfectly. Relieved, he sent it to himself and played it back through headphones. The recording sounded wrong. Not distorted. Not altered. Wrong. The pauses seemed deeper than they should have been. Not empty. Occupied. Like breaths. He deleted the file. The next morning he discovered it restored itself. The recording sat in his downloads folder. Timestamp unchanged. Evan stared at it for several seconds before deleting it again. That evening it returned once more. He stopped checking. Weeks blurred together. The rhythm became part of his life. Part of the apartment. Part of himself. The nights grew colder. Wind rattled the windows. The building settled with occasional groans. Still the faucet maintained its perfect cadence. One night the power went out. The neighborhood vanished into darkness. Streetlights extinguished. Appliances fell silent. The refrigerator's hum disappeared. The heater stopped. For the first time, the apartment became genuinely quiet. Except for the dripping. Tick, 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 tick. The sound floated through absolute darkness. Clearer than ever. Evan sat motionless on the edge of his bed. Without the background noises, he could hear something else. Not another sound. A direction. The dripping no longer seemed to originate from the bathroom. Came from farther away. From behind the bathroom. Behind the walls. As though the faucet merely echoed a source hidden deeper within the building. The realization made his skin tighten. He rose and crossed the hallway. The bathroom smelled faintly damp. Moonlight filtered through the frosted glass. The faucet dripped. Perfect rhythm. Perfect timing. Yet standing beside the sink, he became certain the sound wasn't coming from it. The droplets struck porcelain. He could see them, but the rhythm reached him from somewhere beyond. A layer underneath reality. Like hearing music through several floors of concrete. Evan backed away. The apartment felt larger than it should have. The hallway seemed slightly longer. Not visibly, just enough that walking through it felt unfamiliar. He slept with the lights on. The next day he measured the hallway. 7 feet. Exactly as it had always been. Still, unease lingered. That night the rhythm changed. Only slightly. A new sequence emerged. The difference was small enough that he almost missed it. Yet once noticed, it became impossible to ignore. The pauses had shifted. The pattern now resembled speech. Not language. Speech. The shape of someone talking through water. Evan sat in darkness listening. Hours passed. At some point he realized the dripping was no longer repeating. It was progressing. Each sequence differed from the last. Like sentences. Like conversation. His chest tightened. The apartment seemed to hold its breath. Then another realization arrived. The faucet wasn't speaking to him. It was responding. He became aware of a second rhythm. So faint he couldn't tell whether he heard it or imagined it. A distant series of knocks. Somewhere beyond the walls. Slow. Patient. The faucet answered. The knocks returned. The exchange continued. Evan remained frozen until dawn. After that night, he avoided the bathroom whenever possible. He brushed his teeth in the kitchen sink. Showered at a gym. Kept the door closed. None of it helped. The rhythm carried through walls. through floors, through sleep. His thoughts became tangled. Dreams dissolved into fragments of dripping water and endless hallways. Sometimes he woke believing someone stood outside the bedroom door, listening, not moving, waiting. Then came the final night. The rhythm began before sunset. Evan sat on the living room floor while darkness gathered outside. The faucet dripped steadily. Hours passed. The apartment dimmed. Shadows thickened. The sound grew clearer, not louder, closer. By midnight, it seemed to originate from every room simultaneously. He stood. The bathroom door was open. Moonlight silvered the tiles. The sink gleamed softly. The faucet dripped. Tick, 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 tick. He stepped closer. For the first time, he understood. Not the meaning, the intention. The rhythm had never been a message. It had been a countdown. The final drop fell. Silence followed. Complete. Absolute. The apartment became still. No traffic. No wind. No refrigerator. Nothing. Evan stared at the faucet. A bead of water formed. It hung there, trembling, waiting. Then, from somewhere behind him, deep within the apartment's darkness, another drip answered. And another, spreading room to room, farther than the apartment should have allowed, as though an impossible network of unseen spaces had opened beyond the walls. Evan did not turn around. The sounds multiplied quietly behind him, perfectly rhythmic, perfectly patient, and somewhere among them, almost hidden beneath the dripping, he thought he heard breathing, listening for his reply.